Welcome back to another roundup of some of these books that I read in September, and we'll just jump right into it with the first book. The book Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner is a memoir where Michelle is talking about her relationship with her mother and her mother's battle with cancer and death, and how she had to deal with that emotionally and as well navigate being Korean American and some of the things that went with that. It has a lot of very in-depth descriptions of Korean food, so if you're very into Korean food, this will probably make you very hungry. And I thought it was really heartfelt. This book was really sweet, really heartfelt, really useful to somebody who is struggling with any of the issues talked about. For me, I didn't really connect with it very personally. I feel like the person who probably got the most out of this book was the author herself. It seemed like a very, cathartic experience to write about her issues with her mother and how she dealt with them and dealing with that grief. And I think if you're dealing with those issues, it's excellent. It's very personal, but for me, it wasn't I didn't connect with it a ton. But it was still really good, a really heartfelt memoir. So the book American Fire, Love, Arson, and Life in a Vanishing Land by Monica Hess is super interesting. It's a true story about a 5-month arson spree in rural Virginia and this couple that was responsible for all these arsons. It was more than 67 counts of arson. It's just insane. So this book was super interesting. I hadn't heard of this, and this was really a cool case to look at. I enjoyed it. I wanted to know what happened. My real complaint with it is that I think this would have worked really well in a long form article, but the author was really trying to pad out that book. And so, there would be chapters of, this is a famous couple. This is a couple that is committing crimes. Let's go through every other famous couple that committed crimes together and talk about them. Oh, well, this happened this one time, so let's go into depth this way. I just feel like the author was kind of padding out the runtime a little. But it was so interesting, so I kept going on it. I enjoyed that. I did think that the author kind of hinted at that there was a real reason for these arsons, that there was something that would come up, and by the end I felt a little disappointed that I didn't really feel like I knew why the arsons occurred, which, it's not the author's fault because the arsonist never talked about her motive, but I feel like it was hinted at enough. It was hinted at enough that I felt a little disappointed when I didn't get that, resolution at the end. But all in all, I do recommend it. It was super interesting and such a crazy case, and was told pretty well. I finally got around to reading The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and she wrote Daisy Jones and the Six, which I really liked. And this book is following a journalist where she gets called to do an assignment, and it's with the mysterious Evelyn Hugo, who is our Elizabeth Taylor, Marilyn Monroe type character, and she is going to tell all about her life and her 7 failed marriages and what happened in her life. It's gossipy. It's very gossipy. What I think this author does really well, based on the 2 books I've read, is she makes these fictional things feel like they're really real. So when I read Daisy Jones and the Six, I Googled multiple times to make sure that Daisy Jones and the Six wasn't a real band, because it felt very real, right? And so this, I feel like, did feel like a celebrity memoir, but obviously it's a fictionalized account, and it was fun. I thought it was pretty good. It was engaging. I could not put it down. I needed to know what happened. I enjoyed reading it. I had fun reading it. I feel like the message I got towards the end was really nice too. It was just kind of that maybe the important relationships in her life weren't only the romantic ones, but those like strong friendship and family bonds that she made throughout her life. And I thought that was a good message. I mean, some of it was just silly. I did kind of appreciate there are some sex scenes in it. It's talking about a celebrity with 7 marriages, but for the most part, I didn't have to skip too much. It was a lot of that cut to black kind of thing, so I did appreciate that, and I really enjoyed this. If you want just a fun, gossipy kind of read, I tore through this one in a day. So I read the book The Echo Wife by Sarah Galey, and I was kind of really excited about this because of the premise. The premise is that there is this amazing scientist and she has figured out how to clone people and they can be just like the original. But her husband steals her research, makes a clone of her, but a more even-tempered housewife version, and leaves her for the clone. And then she gets a phone call one day from the clone because the clone has murdered the husband, and what are they gonna do? And I mean, just so ridiculous. It kind of made me think of the movie Duplicity, but if everything was even more insane. So plot point wise, I was here for it. I really enjoyed that, but honestly, I can't give this more than 2 stars. How can you take such a crazy plot, something with so many, like so much potential, and make it kind of boring? I almost wish that they hadn't had it from the scientist perspective, because she wasn't very likable and she used a lot of technical jargon that I thought it wasn't super believable and just kind of detracted from the story. So for a book that had a plot that I really enjoyed, the writing just didn't do it for me. So I don't recommend this one, although it is kind of a crazy book. I read the book When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, and I think this had a really good premise. It basically was talking about gentrification and a lot of the tactics that historically have been used against people of color to remove property ownership and push them out of their assets. And I thought, so like, that's very interesting, but it was written as a thriller. And so, I mean, it kind of worked. I thought that that was a good idea. Just take these things that are already happening, but kind of pull it to the extreme, and it kind of has a commentary of real life. So like, I thought it was a really good idea. Execution wise, once again, not too sure if this worked for me, mainly because the beginning, I feel like, was a little more hit you on the head history lesson, which, I mean, it was useful and interesting information, and the author had clearly done their research on some of the history of Brooklyn and these brownstones and the history of ownership of them, and that was very interesting. But it kind of read as a clunky history book and a little hit you over the head. Then, towards the middle, it went into a corny romance novel, and then at the end, all the thrillery parts were kind of shoved at the end, and I just feel like as a thriller, it didn't work. It didn't kind of bring me along, filled with suspense all the way through, and it was trying to just drive home a singular point. I think this would have worked as either focus on a history book talking about these issues and focus on that, or, I mean, as a thriller, the romance threw me off. There was just something a little unfocused about this one, but it did have some interesting information. I enjoyed it. Okay, I honestly kind of liked the book The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins, and if you can't tell by the title, this is a retelling of Jane Eyre. So it uses the same names, and I enjoyed it for that aspect. It was kind of fun to make the connections, who's who. Mostly, yes, it was a retelling of Jane Eyre, but I feel like it almost had more of a feeling of Rebecca to me. It was a little more Rebecca-esque, in my opinion. I enjoyed it. It was kind of crazy. The Mr. Rochester is a wealthy man in the southern neighborhood, and his wife mysteriously died a few months prior, and Jane is our dog walker of the neighborhood, and they fall in love, but what's going on with the mysterious backstory with his wife, and I enjoyed it, but it was much more Rebecca-esque for me. It was a lot of, oh, can she live up to the reputation that this past wife had, and she can't fill those shoes, and it kind of gave me more vibes of that, but I did enjoy it. It was kind of a fun retelling, nothing too deep, but it was enjoyable.